Good evening. I would like to call this Brunswick City Commission meeting Wednesday, July 20th, 2022 to order. We will now stand for our invocation.
Bow your heads. Most heavenly, most gracious Father, Spirit of the one true living God. Father, we thank you now for this opportunity to come before you to do your business. We pray now, God, for each and every person under the sound of my voice. I pray now, God, for those that are represented here on the dais. We pray now, God, for all of the citizens that came out to be a part of this meeting and to be a part of the decision making as we go forward to represent and to do what it is you called us to do on behalf of the city of Brunswick. We pray now, God, for our staff, Father God, because they are the ones that work behind the scene daily and they work diligently, God. And so we just want to tell you, thank you for them, God. We ask now, God, that you would just cover our decisions as we go forth to do what it is you need us to do on behalf of our constituents, that we will speak for all people and we will be about your business. In your most holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We will remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. We would like to pause now before we move into the approval of the agenda to recognize some special guests that we have with us from the Winners Youth Program. And I'd like to turn it over right now to Mayor Pro Tem Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to recognize my youth leadership program that is a part of my church, Worth It Nation International Ministries. And we have our youth leadership program, and the name of that program is the Winners Program. Of course, the acronym for our church is WIN, Worth It Nation. And so we make winners, we produce winners out of Worth It Nation International Ministries. And so the program is for them to be able to learn about the community, to learn about government, not just municipal government, but about county government, all forms of government. And so we will be making visits to this, our first meeting, the city, as well as the county, as well as the Board of Education. But we will be also doing other trainings and sessions, work sessions, financial and all of that kind of stuff. But it's just a matter of being able to train leaders for the next generation. And so we're teaching them that they are leaders in their community as well as in their church. And they are in this capacity as believers. And so we are happy, I'm happy to have them here with us. If you all would stand. So I just want to introduce you all to them and introduce them to you all, and just want to continue to encourage them. And if you know anybody else that might want to participate, we have no limits and no boundaries. So all are welcome to participate in the program. And I'm just delighted to have them here on tonight. So thank you all for coming and taking out of your time to be a part of this. Back to you, Mr.
We appreciate you all being here, appreciate your leadership. And we are looking for the type of leaders that you all are being built into. So make sure when you leave off, you come back home and pour into this community that's given so much to you. So we thank you for being here. We'll now move on to the approval of the agenda, and we will open it for addendums or motions.
I have an addition to the current agenda. So I would like to make a motion to add for consideration and approval, the intergovernmental agreement between Glenn County and the city of Brunswick for the use and distribution of proceeds from the proposed 2022 special purpose local option sales tax, or SPLOST, and that item be added as 5A after the project list.
We appreciate that. We have a motion on the table. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes and the agenda has an addendum. With that addendum 5A, we are now moving on to the adoption of the full regular meeting agenda. If there are no more addendums, I will open it up for a motion.
Motion to approve.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. We will now move on to public hearings. Land use number 2, consider approval of conditional use petition number 22-01.
Sorry, give me 1 second here. There, share the screen. So conditional use petition, and y'all have to excuse me. I'll work my way through this. I'm still getting through my recovery from my surgery a couple of weeks ago. Conditional use petition number 22-01. The requested conditional use is by Joe Stalvey. He's petitioning for a location at 2120 Newcastle Street for the sale of portable buildings. The subject parcel is 1.16 acres in size and has been vacant for a number of years. As we zoom in, you can see it's surrounded in blue on the location map on the screen. The subject parcel is zoned highway commercial. Parcels across Newcastle Street Lane to the east are zoned general residential. Properties to the north and south are zoned highway commercial, and to the west is basic industrial. The proposed development at the location, the property is currently vacant. The applicant proposes to create a parking area access from L Street and erect a small office. The open yard storage on the site would be of portable buildings for sale. Under our ordinances, this is considered a conditional use. Under highway commercial zoning, this is set out as use F, which is an open yard use for the sale, rental, and or storage of materials or equipment, excluding junk or other salvage, provided that such uses are separated from adjoining residential properties by a suitable planting screen, fence, or wall at least 6 feet in height above finished grade. The conditional use process allows the city commission to place conditions on a parcel to make certain that the proposed uses are compatible with surrounding uses. After examining the application, staff recommends in favor of granting the requested conditional use with the following condition: that fencing currently adjacent to Newcastle Street Lane remain in place and have screen added or suitable planting to separate the use from the adjacent residential properties. This application went before the Planning and Appeals Commission at their May 11th meeting. Concerns were expressed about screening from the adjacent residential areas, the visual impact upon the gateway area to downtown, and the potential of contamination from previous ownership by Atlanta Gas Light. Because of these issues, a decision was deferred until June. At the June 11th PAC meeting, the applicant provided an environmental clearance from EPD about the property. The Planning and Appeals Commission voted 5-0 to recommend approval with the following conditions. One, that the fencing currently adjacent to Newcastle Street Lane would remain in place and have screen added or suitable planting to separate the use from the adjoining residential properties. 2, that no structures on site were to be habitable. 3, that access to the site would be from L Street only. 4, that loading and unloading would take place on the property and not within the streets. And 5, that a 5-year sunset provision be placed on the conditional use permit. That summarizes the application and the recommendations from staff and the Planning and Appeals Commission. We do have Lance Saby, the chairman of the Planning and Appeals Commission, available via Zoom. If you've got any questions about their review of the application. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them this time.
Thank you, Director Hunter, and thank you, Chairman Saby, for being with us. We will now open it up to questions from the commission.
I would like to know what the discussions were amongst the Planning and Appeals Commission regarding the gateway as this conditional use permit is so close to our gateway entry point from that side of the city, and the impact and effect that that would have on other development and trying to continue to improve properties along that area.
Lance,
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, thanks for having me tonight. To answer your question, Commissioner Martin, obviously, as you can see, we deferred this application when it first came before our commission. I think in general, our board was very concerned about the impact that this potentially could have, to your point, to the gateway of our community. To give you a couple items, I would like to highlight that you probably need to consider during reviewing this application is the first item to review is, does this conform to our current comp plan? We had a lot of discussion about that, and I think that's open for your interpretation. And I honestly think the commission was probably fairly well divided on whether or not this application met our current comp plan or not. The other item you'll notice is that we did put a recommend multiple conditions on this property because of the concern. I think it's important to note that we did recommend a 5-year sunset, and also the screening and also restricting his delivery and potential pickups as well. The other item just to note for the commissioners is that, as you know, we are in the process of doing a revision to all of our zoning ordinances, which includes a modification to our downtown core zone. In the new recommended downtown core revisions, this application would currently not be allowed. So that's something to take note of as well. But again, I think we're all, both the Planning and Appeals Commission and the City Commission, want to encourage business and don't want to discourage business owners. I think the concept on the table, though, is just a decision whether or not this is the right location for this business. So hopefully that, Ms. Martin, hopefully that answers your questions. I'm happy to answer more if you have more details.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. What's the maximum number of buildings that would be stored on the property?
We did not set a maximum. The applicant indicated, and I don't know if he's coming. I don't assume he indicated it'd be between 15 and 20 buildings at any given time.
And that would be at a time?
Yes.
Okay, so and is there a picture of these buildings?
He has another location out near out in the county.
Yeah, it's right next to Tractor Supply, Commissioner Harrison. And so they're temporary buildings. Think of the kind of like an outdoor storage shed that you also see in the parking lot of Lowe's, as well as he'll be selling the metal garages that you would just pull under that don't have walls on all 4 sides.
And there's not going to be production of these buildings?
No production. All construction's off-site. They come in already assembled and they're held there until they're sold and delivered to customers. So no construction on site.
Okay, so that would be more like a sale?
Sales, yes.
What are the specifics of the sunset provision?
So with the sunsets, what we would require is at the end of that 5-year period, we go through this process again and examine whether it's still compatible with the area that is around it based on any changes that have taken place, and or examine just the overall condition and whether we've had any issues with them following the conditions during that time.
So the conditions now are not going to be the same, or the ordinances now are not going to be the same ordinances in 5 years.
Potentially,
how is that?
assuming as we go through, now that we have just about finished the work by the planning commission, as we start going through the public phase of this and bring this to you, assuming that you followed those recommendations, this would not be an allowed use in this area.
And so how is that going to then affect
So
the
that,
future?
so once that conditional use is issued and he is in place, this would be a new one for us to handle. I would assume as long as it's renewed, he would be allowed to continue there. You would have the right to reject that and say, we don't think it's compatible with the new uses at all, and you could end that. So it would be your discretion, but it would essentially be a grandfathered use until that 5 year. So if we changed that later this year, he would still be allowed to go through that 5 year period.
And so he is, or whomever is well aware that there is a great potential that after the sunsetting of this petition, or this conditional use petition, a permit, that there is a great potential that things could change if there is no longer the compatibility for them to be in that area based upon development and future visions and development for that corridor.
Now, we had this similar discussion in his presence and discussed the ins and outs of this. So I would say yes, that he's aware of that.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure, because 5 years, and they're an established business.
Right.
So they're not trying to establish a new business, but they are establishing a new location. And so the time frame to even get an extended location established is still going to be back within that time.
Yeah.
John, the corner there you've acknowledged was the old Atlanta gas light place. And we just were handed environmental.
Yeah.
What else can go on that piece of property right now?
My understanding from reading the restrictive covenant on the deed and reading the release letter from EPD is that it's allowed for commercial uses. In my discussions with Rachel Thompson about this from Glen Environmental Coalition, there does need to be an awareness of anyone who develops that property that as they do land disturbing activity, that could open up new things, that while it's secure now, it could have impacts on people later on. But it has been approved for commercial uses by EPD.
Been approved for what?
Commercial purposes by EPD.
So right now they could put a building
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
By environmental standards. It's clear.
That is my understanding.
That's great. That's really good to know.
Mayor, if I can offer a statement in regards to the recommendation from staff, I want to be on record to say that recommendation is not with the concurrence of the city manager's office. I do not feel that this location is proper for that type of business. As much as I advocate for business in the city, my concern is that it is the gateway of our community. And normally setups like that are put on rural areas or outlier areas where you have these sheds being sold. So it's not necessarily conducive to, businesses that I think should be in that close proximity to the downtown area. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think certainly if you drive north on 341, you'll see evidence of that most of those types of businesses catering to those types of needs are in the 4,000 block or even the, latter part of the 3,000 blocks, and certainly the 4,000 block as you get closer to I-95. So.
I just like to bring to the attention of folks here that you've got a big concrete building sitting just a couple of blocks down. And I'd like to ask you what the difference, putting some small buildings on a vacant lot, one that hasn't been occupied. What's the difference in that big concrete monument standing there for 10, I don't know how many years it's been. Does anybody up here know how long that building has stood there? I remember talking about it coming in here when we had a problem with some moving the Brunswick wood preserving over to Hercules and got no traction whatsoever about it. None.
It's probably been
To me,
2012, 2013.
Yeah, that building's been there a long time. What are we doing to improve our gateway? What's happening there? John, is any action being taken there on that building, or is it just going to be allowed to stand there? City manager, I'll ask you the same question. What's going on there?
I don't have any update on that building, but my comment would be that, yes, it is unsightly. Yes, it is something that we probably should diligently try to improve, but putting another unsightly establishment there would not be complimentary, nor would it help resolve the problem.
Well, my thought there is this is temporary, probably. And that piece of property has been vacant and somebody has been paying taxes on it for a very, very long time. And I think that's awfully important for us to consider up here.
Director Hunter, I'm going to have some rudimentary questions. So,
Sure.
because these seem like softball questions, it's just because of my own ignorance. What do these buildings look like? I'm confused as to what buildings we're talking about.
Typical backyard
Okay,
sheds.
so backyard sheds.
Yes,
And then you're selling,
of various sizes
and they
and
would have
configurations.
about 20 of them
Yes, sir.
on the lot. And is that the only thing they'd be selling there? So am I imagining just a trailer or some rendition of a small building in front and then just almost a parking lot of small
It'll be,
buildings?
my understanding, a gravel parking area, and they would actually use one of the sheds
For
built
their
out as
office?
an office.
Okay,
And then they would be spread out through the lot so that they're still accessible for delivery and
Yeah.
removal.
Yeah.
That's one reason there would not be a large number
Yeah.
on that property.
and none of the deliveries would be able to be made on the main thoroughfare. They would all come in.
They would pull their vehicle with the sheds on them completely onto the property for loading and unloading. So
Okay.
no loading would take place on either street.
Okay. And if you could help me on this as well, what's currently, I guess, approved to be there?
So this is this is zoned for highway commercial.
Okay.
Highway commercial is our most permissive commercial zone.
Okay,
So really, it can be anything from offices to any type of commercial business
okay,
that you can think of. But there are exceptions that do require these conditional uses. One of those are what are called open yard storage, which would be car lots.
uh-huh,
items like this where they've got materials out for sale, a lumber yard
Okay.
would need, because you've got outdoor storage, those type uses need approval so that we can look at, is there screening so it's not visually intrusive to the adjacent areas, or
Right.
is there a particular reason about that type use that would create a congestion problem or really any other type of conflict with what's going on around it.
Okay. Is the fencing detailed in any kind of way, or it just says fencing?
So typically unless we are in a area with a particular overlay,
Okay.
we don't put a restriction on the type fencing. It's just required that there's a screening so that you can't see through it. And so visually it would either need plantings, which most of this fence is actually already planted. So we've asked that he maintain it and fill in areas that are gapped, or they could put the black windscreen on them. That's another way we've done it. In some cases, when we put in a fencing requirement, they choose to do a wooden privacy fence. It really just varies from situation to situation.
And just, I guess, some follow-ups. If I'm assuming across the street, is it residential?
So there is residential to the east across an alley. To the north is a small church and then commercial property.
Okay.
And to the west is zoned basic industrial, but it's undeveloped area in the marina, and then you get to Cut Quick just to the south of it.
Gotcha. Is it on the side of the street of the marina?
No, it
It's
is
on
on
the
the
other
other
side.
side.
The marina's
Gotcha.
right
Yep.
across. the
Right
street.
across.
Yeah.
My last question, not that this is a prerequisite, I
Yes,
just
sir.
like to ask in general. I guess two more questions, let me say that. If we were to make the change, does the change go with the business or does the change go with the property? So if the business only lasts, say, 2 years, he picks up and leaves, it's not profitable, are we then open to a lumber yard being there?
No, so conditional use stays with the person that it is granted to.
Okay.
So if this operation closes down and goes away, the next person who comes in there, they would have to go through the exact same process.
Okay.
The only way we transfer it typically is if the business is sold so that it continues operation itself.
Mhm.
So yeah, if this goes away, a lumber yard couldn't go in there without going through this same process, or a car lot, or anything else that would be open yard storage.
Are they doing anything with owning this business and potentially bringing this business here that makes the land easier to develop for those who would come after, or is it just zero-sum game?
I think slightly above zero-sum game.
Okay.
And ultimately, it would at least be maintained
Yeah.
and cut on a regular basis because of the type use. Whereas currently, it's one of those properties that every once in a while we have to send a letter to the property owner and say the grass needs to be cut. And it's
Okay.
So that would at least be an improvement.
Perfect. And has there been any conversation with, neighbors, MPA, or I think the Torres family, being that this is, I'm assuming directly?
Michael Torres came to the first planning meeting. We do, because of the Planning and Appeals Commission process, we use our existing open public meetings
Gotcha.
for
For
invitation
input.
for anyone to come for.
Was there any input from Mr. Torres?
He gave the same advice of being wary of this type of development in our gateway area.
Okay.
And that was his concern.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
Michael Torres did send an email to the commission in regards to the this particular item, and did ask that the vote deny the request.
Okay.
To vote how, Regina?
He asked that the vote deny the request.
Yes, yep, open up for questions.
Go ahead.
My question is really somewhat of a concern, is for the egress and ingress, entering and exiting of the heavy trucks and that stuff that's going to be pulling in that stuff and it's going to be taking it out. And then, so you're right there at the corner of a heavily occupied residential area. So that's where I have my concern, because the traffic that'll become, the heavy use traffic that'll be now coming into that specific area. And so now it's not coming off of Bay Street, it's coming off little narrow L Street that already has its own problems with structure. And so I'm trying to visualize and picture how this is going to affect that area specifically for those residents, specifically for those residents in that area that now have to be, would potentially be subjected to that consistency of that heavy use traffic coming right in that little narrow area.
And I think that's a legitimate concern.
But
That is something that was discussed. Our understanding from the applicant is that the deliveries would not be on 18-wheelers or large trucks, that they would be larger pickup trucks with gooseneck trailers that had them on it, that it was.
It's not gonna be any little small 18-wheelers or semis or anything like that that's going to be traveling into the area on L Street. Because now we're not talking about the width of Bay Street, we're talking about the width of L Street, a 2-lane area.
Right. And there could be the possibility, I believe there are a couple of curb cuts onto that property from Bay Street. So that could be.
Because I know this says that they're not going to be entering or exiting.
Well,
on or off of Bay Street.
that could be a condition that you could change and could place on.
But it
The condition
isn't
of
the
use.
whole east side of that piece of property, isn't there an alley that fronts the whole
There is,
east side?
there
So
is.
there's ingress and egress for that kind of thing right there. Right through that alley. And are you through, Felicia?
No.
I know the alleys.
No, I'm about to listen at, I'm listening at what you're saying, so I can formulate my thoughts on that too, because
Yeah.
I picture the alley, I
Yeah.
see the alley.
Yeah.
I don't know if the alley was made for that type of traffic, so, but I'm listening at you.
Well, I don't know either.
Yeah,
But
they're typically not, but there are locations where I know 18-wheelers service down alleys on the backside of some of the buildings in the city.
And
So,
tear down power lines.
And-
People
and-
live
yeah.
in- Really, people live in those alleys
Yeah.
and there are power lines in those alleys. So if you're talking about a truck traveling through that really doesn't do anything for me. Because now you're talking about stripping power lines
Yeah.
in that area. And so that's not just gonna affect just that alley side, that's gonna affect the entirety. So that's still not a good picture for me to see for a potential large truck traveling down that small alley that is not designed
Yeah.
for.
no, we would not recommend that.
Okay.
well, I also want to bring about the thought of, is there not a wastewater treatment plant sitting right there?
Oh, a pump
That would be-
station.
The pumping station, yeah.
It's-
And where was any objection to that being on the corridor? There was none.
I wasn't on the board then,
Absolutely.
Johnny.
Well, it's no,
That's been there a long
it's been
time,
there
but
longer
That's
than
been-
any
that's
of
been
it.
longer than I've been
There's
there.
no question,
And
but
that's a building.
it was revamped over about a almost 2-year period in there. And, nobody said anything about that. This is a person, the only way I can see it, that's been paying taxes on a piece of property. And he's got an opportunity to utilize that piece of property. And we've got stuff sitting there that is a lot more distasteful to me than some small buildings. And it's that big piece of concrete structure sitting up there. It should have been, it shouldn't have been there. It didn't even have a building permit when it went there. It had no water when they constructed that thing, and it's still standing there. So,
And we,
And-
and I don't mean, but we understand that, Johnny, so that's why we appear to forego that type of stuff happening again. I mean, I wasn't on the board then. So.
this to me is a no-brainer as far as utilization of a piece of property. But John, was there not a yellow sign put on this piece
Yes,
of
sir.
property?
Yes.
Did you have any objections? I understand what our city manager just read to us. I heard that loud and clear. Were there any other objections?
No, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, you may have received some that I did.
Yeah, the commission received additional emails on the top. Yeah, quick question. Is he the owner of the land?
No, Mr. Stout will be leasing it.
So he'd be leasing the land?
Yes.
Is there, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, is there a strategic reason that Brunswick has a lot of open parcels? I mean, you can go down Gloucester and find plenty of parking lots and things to park it. I'm just trying to find out, is in his mind, when he came before the planning commission, was there a thought that this was some strategic placement?
I think it was based on the number of sales that he was having downtown. And the continuity to his other location further out 341 by Tractor Supply. So that it gives him the ability to move between both.
No, he did not list the owner of the property on his application.
It's listed as
It's
an
it's
LLC.
82 LLC is who the owner of the property is.
I have the name of the owner somewhere and I can't remember it off the top of
So
my head.
it's not Atlanta Gas Light.
No, it is not Atlanta Gas Light.
Just one additional question. In terms of the 5-year sunset, was there any discussion by the planning commission on shortening that, or did it was just recommended for 5 years?
That was their recommendation. I think actually there may have been a longer sunset discussed at one point and then they shortened it to 5 years.
Any additional questions? Hearing none, we will open the floor for a motion
Excuse me, Mr.
or
Mayor.
public hearing. I'm sorry.
There you go.
So it's open to the public for feedback. Anyone? Please come forward. Y'all can come as a team. It's all good.
My name is Mary Kay Henning. Rosemary Mann. Tyler Vaughn. And we live in downtown Brunswick. When we heard about this application, we felt compelled to come forward because in agreement with the city manager, that this application should be denied because it is not a entity that is recommended to be on the gateway to Brunswick. And I know that that big building has been there as long as I've been here, which is 12 years. And I don't know why code enforcement hasn't taken care of that. But this would only make it worse. This is a special application that should be denied because it is not in tune with all the other businesses that are being going up in Brunswick. And a lot of people have worked very hard on their houses and their businesses in Brunswick to make it look good. And it's our feeling that this is just not going to have a beneficial effect on the entranceway into Brunswick. And I know that there's the waste treatment plant, and I know that there's that big building there that's been there for a long time, but this was just going to make it worse. And in 5 years, they're going to come in and say that they're grandfathered in, and it's going to, they're going to want to stay there. Tractor Supply, perfect place for this kind of operation. Perfect. It's not in a residential area. And I think this would have a very negative effect on the people who live in the area and work in the area. And it would have a negative effect on the what we're trying to portray Brunswick as.
We want to beautify our city. And I feel, as she said, that it just is not going to help that. Granted, they're paying taxes, yes, bring in a business, but
But he's going to be leasing this property,
Yeah.
so he could lease some other properties.
Yeah.
This isn't the owner that, and the guy who bought it knew it was a brownfield when he bought it, right? So he knew there was going to be
Sure he did.
limitations on what he could put on this property. And this is just going to be, what in my mind is going to be another pumpkin patch, where they denied what that guy wanted to do there, and now he's got those ugly containers for sale on the pumpkin patch. And I just don't think it's appropriate for the land use. And so that's why we felt compelled to come speak out. Thank you.
As a downtown business owner, I agree with Regina McDuffie 100%. I think this is I'm pro-business, but this isn't the spot for this business. We want this to be a beautiful entrance to our city. And as our city continues to grow and develop, as the downtown is doing under all of y'all's leadership, we want it to be a beautiful place that attracts tourists and is great for the community that already lives there. I'm not opposed to this business, but not there.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Yes.
I'm Jack Daniel. I live down in Norwich in the south end. Actually have a couple of houses because we outgrew one and we love Brunswick so much, we decided to buy a second house and just take over the corner of the neighborhood. And first, I want to agree with a lot of what you've said. I've discovered, having moved from Massachusetts, that Georgia is not the low tax pro-business place it pretends to be when making fun of Massachusetts. And I'm all for making fun of Massachusetts, but that's another conversation. But there's so many people, including all of you, working so hard to make a difference in this city. And I've seen it in the 7 years since I bought my first house here. And yeah, there are some eyesores and they're grandfathered in, unfortunately. And I think the real challenge is trying to stop it from getting worse. And we have some of the most scenic riverfront junkyards I've ever seen, right? We could, if the windows opened that way, we could look at beautiful riverfront space that other cities would be doing river walks or other things. And I know those are conversations for another thing. It's a lot of effort going into Mary Ross. So I agree with what's been said. I think that as a gateway to the city, there's a real problem letting it get any worse. That there are plenty of places in the city that would work better. The other end of Norwich, for me, there's a lot of stuff there that's not great, but it's high traffic. It's easy enough to get up the Tractor Supply to move the things. I think there are better places for this. And then the last thing I want to ask, and I don't know the answer, and I should say this. I've owned a house here 7 years. Yes, I should be here more often. I'm sorry. I should be and will be.
Thank you for being here tonight.
I shouldn't only be when Mr. Hunter talks about expanding the historic district and maybe making it harder for me, but you didn't, so it's okay. What happens if they go bankrupt? I just imagine somebody starts something and goes bankrupt and leaves the city with an albatross. Like, oh, I don't know, our pet peeve, that concrete thing. Is there some protection? Is there a destruction bond or something that makes them clean it up when they leave? Which I just think about because of our Greek, welcome to Brunswick thing. But anyway, thank you. I think we need to do more for small business. We need to do more for local business. But I don't think this is the place for this business. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Yes, please. Oh. Yep. And for our clerk, can you please state name and what else you need?
Address.
I'm Elizabeth Verheyen. My legal address is Post Office Box 522, Brunswick, Georgia, 31521. I could restate everything that was already said, particularly by the trio. I'm going to add to it, and I'm not going to mince my words. There's times to be diplomatic, there's times to be very polite, but I'm not going to be that polite tonight. We've lived here for a decade. And when we first moved to town, we would always hear people say, Brunswick has so much potential. Brunswick has so much potential. And in the time that we've lived here, we've seen so much potential be realized downtown. We have neighbors who've put in a brewery. We have neighbors who've put in other businesses. We've seen businesses that were small when we got here really blossom and grow. And we had the understanding that things would be beautified. A lot of work, Julie can speak to this, has been done on squares, to plans to do things better. Neighborhood associations meet all the time. And yet, as you all know, my husband used to be on the URA, and I was given permission to speak for him since he cannot be here tonight. Al and I have noticed there's several different things. At different times we've had people will come in and they ask for provisional this or that. And you've had businesses, I believe the name of it is CHC. Does that ring a bell? Okay. They said no junk sitting around. They were going to get their business going, wouldn't be an eyesore. Drive down there. I think everybody knows it's an eyesore. It's a junk mess. You drive into town. Al was on the URA, and you have people coming into town complaining they wanted to bring business here. They'd call him and say, hey, I just want to talk to you since I know you're on the URA. And you'd have these conversations, and the feedback he'd get over and over and over. And he's much more diplomatic than I am. I'm going to shoot it to you straight. You come into town, you smell the pulp mill, you smell the potty smells coming from the sewer for a long time, really strong. Then you come into town, and Al was 27 years military. The first thing we thought when we saw the big concrete building, we in our family, we call it the Serbia building. And that's no offense to Serbian people. But when Al was serving, that's what we saw. Friends we had in Serbia, that's, they would send pictures in the 90s. That's what we saw. Things that look like that. I don't understand why, just because we have some eyesores, just because some things don't smell so good, why are we continuing on that? Well, we've already got this, so we'll just let this go. We've already got this, so we'll let this go. Why not take this a chance? I believe it was Lance that commented that this would not, if we already had the city planning in place the way it is expected to go in, this would not be approved. Why can't we be forward thinking? Why can't we just look forward to, this is where we're headed. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to care about the citizens. And I understand you have to balance tax rolls and things like that. We have so many nonprofits coming into town too. Things, there's so many churches, so many things like that. I understand that the taxes are important, but I feel like the more that we can prioritize positive growth and beauty and things like that, you'll attract more and more of it. Why not invest in the positive, in the good, in the growth factor? Not everything has to be a metal building, and they have had a place out by Tractor Supply, and there's plenty of other places that are, country related or whatever that are near a highway. They're very practical, and that can be done there. There's no reason that has to be on that one piece of property. So I know I was long-winded, but I said what I feel like I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Long time no see. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Glen Environmental Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this conditional use permit. Since 1990, the Glen Environmental Coalition has been committed to our mission of assuring a clean environment and healthy economy for citizens of coastal Georgia. I'd like to start off this evening by just noting that we understand that there is some contention around the vision of this area. We're not here to make an opinion on that. It's up to you as the commission to decide how you want this area and the gateway of downtown to look. But tonight we wanted an opportunity to share some additional environmental information about this site for y'all to consider. Generally, community-wide, not just in the city of Brunswick, but in Glenn County, we do support the reuse. Sorry about that. We support the reuse of formerly blighted areas. This site has been vacant since the 1990s when it was originally vacated by Atlanta Gas Light. So it's going on about 20 years that it's been a vacant property. As I mentioned, it was formerly owned by Atlanta Gas Light, who operated a manufactured gas plant. This was formally listed as a designated hazardous waste site by the Environmental Protection Division until it was delisted in between 2016 and 2017. Though the site was delisted, the property remains subject to a universal environmental covenant. What our organization knows about environmental covenants is when a property has that in place, it usually means that there is contamination that's been left behind. This site is zoned, as you know, highway commercial. And so therefore there is an environmental covenant that restricts any residential development. And that would be because if there were people living on the property, they may be unnecessarily exposed to chemicals on site. So that does indicate that there could be potential exposure on the property. Significant removal of contaminated sediments and groundwater monitoring have taken place since the site was first designated in 1994. I did provide a document for you guys. It's actually the second page. Maybe I should have stapled that on the front if I knew I was going to talk about that one first. But you can see on the diagram that I've shared with y'all, and I also sent that via email earlier today. The areas that are outlined, there's like 3 different colors, pink, blue, and orange are the areas that were excavated. If you look closely, I know it's really small, but you can also see where the groundwater monitoring wells were on the site. So that just shows a little bit of the history of some of the environmental monitoring and excavations that took place. The environmental covenant does allow commercial activity as an appropriate reuse of the property. However, as I mentioned, and if you look at the first page, you'll actually see the list of substances, regulated substances that were found on the site. This is a pretty substantive list. It's almost 24 or more chemicals of concern that the Environmental Protection Division was monitoring while the site was a hazardous waste site. So again, as the site goes into reuse, you want to think about minimal impact to the soil and groundwater. So any disturbance to the soil could potentially expose workers, or say if the joint water sewer was to come in and put in a water line, we want to be thinking about how do we make sure that people aren't being unnecessarily exposed. We were unable to get a hold of Jason Metzger, who's the program manager of the response and remediation program with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. He's on vacation this week. But we wanted to just take a look at the most recent groundwater monitoring data. When the site was delisted in 2016, there was 2 more rounds of groundwater monitoring that were required by the property owner and the responsible parties. And we haven't gotten a chance to look at that data, or me personally, because I wasn't in the office of the Glen Environmental Coalition at that time. So I did want to take a look at that before, I kind of give you our full recommendation. Again, if they were going to put in water lines or disturb any of that soil, I'd like to be able to look at that information before we say whether or not we think it's safe. But I wasn't able to get that information. Additionally, the site is not a Brownsfield, it's just a former hazardous waste site. So Brownsfield is a separate funding program for reuse of former hazardous waste sites. And I wanted to also double check with the Environmental Protection Division if this site would be eligible for a Brownsfield grant for redevelopment, because I know that is something that the city has utilized to redevelop properties within the city. If you have any questions, I know it's a lot of information, you can let me know, but I do really appreciate the opportunity to submit comments, and also just, we're really trying to remain neutral, just providing some additional information for you guys.
Can I ask
Yes,
a question real
absolutely.
quick? Again, maybe a rudimentary question. When you say soil disturbance or ground disturbance, would it then be better for anybody moving on this property to be using asphalt or something where the ground, or is the surface of the ground not really the ground that you're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. So if, say, the business owner, not property owner, business owner was to pave the property, that would act as a barrier to any soils underneath the site that may or may not be contaminated.
But we're talking, he's just doing gravel, right?
Gravel.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much.
Appreciate you.
You guys have a good night.
Any other comment?
Yeah, I would like to say that I really appreciate everybody that's come up here opposing this and stating their oppositions. And believe me, I have ridden by that corner up there probably more than anybody in this room, and probably more than any 10 people in this room over my lifetime. And it's been a vacant piece of property. There has been nothing on it. I do not remember the old Atlanta gas light building that was torn down there. That's how long this place has been vacant. And I want to remind you that G Street is a gateway to the downtown area, as is Altama. And we have just permitted for these tiny houses and shelters to be placed on G Street and on Altama Ave. We've just gone through all that. And believe me, I'm not saying this is the most desirable thing to have there. That would be ludicrous for anybody to say that. It isn't. But there are more, I think you'll have more desirable things if you show folks that you're willing to open up to some commercialization here. Whether you like it or you don't like it, I think that's where you are. We need to do stuff like that. I'll tell you, one of my serious objections to it is you're in a wind velocity there. And I can see that as being a problem. That I can see. But as far as the aesthetics of it, I think that can be dealt with. If you can tolerate that monolithic concrete building down there for all the years it's been there and have no objection to it whatsoever, I don't know how you can deny a person that sat there and paid property taxes for all these years. It's beyond me. And I'm more than empathetic to everybody that's come here. I'm with you 100%. I really am. But again, I know how long that this piece of property has been there. I do not have an idea how long the person has owned it, but I do know I would like to see something happening there. And we've got a person that is already in business wanting to move into the city, if I've heard all this right. So I just want you to know where I'm coming from. I don't disagree with anybody that's come up here. But my position is that we need to be very, very thoughtful about folks that want to come in here and offer to take a piece of property that's been sitting there for God knows how. John, is there any way to find out how long that piece of property has been vacant? Could we find out when that building was torn down? Because I don't think anything's been there since then. I don't think there's been any commercialization whatsoever. I'd love to know that. Whether, regardless of how it goes here, I would just love to know that. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner, you bring up some good points. I do believe the city needs to be diligent and more diligent about the gateway to our city and asking those tough questions, that concrete building that you see, and really focusing in on what the rehab of the area will be. And so we can be more clear with those who may want to move into the area aesthetically, as well as be honest with them about kind of what we as city leaders want to see at the gateway of our community. So we appreciate that. With that, is there any other questions? And hearing none, we will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the cup as stated by the Planning Commission.
Hearing a first, do we have a second? Hearing a first, do we have a second? Hearing no second, I wanted to check the motion dies, the motion fails. So we will reopen the consideration of the cup for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we deny the approval of the conditional use permit number 22-01, petitioning for conditional use at that property. Be denied.
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes and the cup is denied. Director Hunter, I would like to say, hopefully we can work with the business owner. What we do want to say is we want business to come to Brunswick. We want it to be focused in the right area. And I know I want to work personally, hopefully with you, to find him a parcel inside of the city that makes sense, because we want him here in Brunswick. So thank you so much. We'll now move on to items to be considered for approval. Consider approval of July 6, 2022 minutes. We will now open that for a motion.
Make a motion that we approve minutes as presented.
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by usual sign of aye. Aye. All those opposed, hearing none, the motion passes. We will now move on to consider approval of contract for cemetery labor services. Director Albertson.
Good evening. This item is an item for approval of an agreement with the Georgia Department of Corrections to provide an inmate labor crew for, we would use for maintenance and groundskeeping labor at our cemeteries in the city. As you know, during the past year, we used two Department of Labor crews. And we've used these crews since I've been employed with the city, but we had two this past year. We had the cemetery crew and we also had a skilled labor crew. But after some analysis, and we just don't feel like we're getting our money's worth for the skilled labor crew, and budgeted to hire two permanent positions in facilities and move forward that way. But we are interested in keeping the inmate or the cemetery labor crew. We had some discussion about that through the finance committee. And during those discussions, ran some numbers on the cost of the cemetery labor crew versus full-time employees. The cost of the agreement of the labor crew is $49,318. We also provide a van for the crew to travel back and forth to Alma. We provide fuel for that van, maintenance for that van, and we provide equipment for the crew to use while they're here. All of that comes to a total of $95,518 for the labor crew. We also ran the numbers for hiring two additional crew members, assuming they came in at our lowest salary, which is just over $14 an hour, plus benefits. we would need some equipment as well for those crews to get started. And that comes out to a total of $87,959. Both of these, it's important to note that both of these estimates are based on a 80 man hours per week. That's assuming 5 crew members working 4 hours a day, 20 hours a day, 4 days a week. They work Monday through Thursdays. They don't work Fridays. And then the 2 laborers would be 40 hours a week each. So I do feel like we would get a little higher output from the labor crew, just because it's more the 2 crew members, permanent crew members, are not going to work all 80 of those hours. You know, obviously it's going to take some time for them to get to and from the site in the morning and afternoon, that kind of thing. It's important to note that we still do supplement even with the cemetery crew when we have the labor crew out there. During this heavy growing season, when it's raining like it is every day, it's hot, we do supplement with our other crews, our parks crews, streets crews. We bring those guys in on the weekend some to mow and try to make sure we're keeping up with the cemetery. I feel like with the labor or the 2 full-time employees, we would have to supplement a good bit more. When we are supplementing with their other crews, then obviously something else is not getting maintained, you know, Altamar or 17 or a park somewhere is not getting maintained. So that's just, you know, something to consider there. Also, I think, or one thing that was mentioned, and not to get too far off in the weeds, when we did talk with the cemetery or the prison about other options, there was some talk of bringing a crew from Waycross. But in talking with the correction system, there's not an available crew coming out of Waycross. So that option, I guess, is off the table at this point. But I was going to say that one other option that we looked at was contractor labor. As you know, we did contract out the cemetery work a couple of years ago when during COVID and the cemetery crew quit coming. We brought in a contractor to keep up. That contractor had a hard time keeping up, but just based on pricing that we got during that proposal, we feel like that we'll be running around $200,000 to bring in a contractor that could adequately do that job. So I don't think contract labor is an option here either. So, you know, I think we're dealing with basically inmate crew versus full-time employees crew. And, you know, I really think the cost here, the 95 versus right at 88,000 is really the difference. I think is negligible. My recommendation would be to move forward with the cemetery or the inmate labor crew for a couple of reasons. One, the cemetery has, I guess you'd say, gone down quickly in the 2 weeks that they've not been here. I mean, it's easy to see how quickly it can get out of hand out there with it raining every day like this. We had our crews in there all weekend to help keep it up. But going back with the cemetery crew or the inmate crew would be a quicker fix. I think we could, if this were approved tonight, we could sign the contract tomorrow being Thursday. They don't work on Friday, but they could be back on Monday. So I think that's a more immediate, you know, hiring 2 people. We've got 6 openings right now. We're not getting a lot of interviews or applications. Who knows when we're gonna hire those people. But also I think, you know, going forward in the future, I think this cemetery crew has proven to be a very, very effective crew for us in managing the cemeteries and keeping up and allowing our crews to work on other areas of the city effectively. So that's my recommendation. So.
Thank you, Director Albertson.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank you for the additional work that you've done from the questions that came out of the Finance Committee. I know, those questions kind of emanated from myself. So I will say just a couple of things at the top and then have a quick question for you. It was outstandingly important to me to ensure that those who were incarcerated, who worked for us, were receiving some type of compensation for their work. I was clear in the beginning that compensation didn't have to be monetary, but to ensure that their work meant something to them and also to their families and was a little more than just kind of cutting our grass and getting to get out for a day. In our conversations with the corrections facility, they let us know that while they don't compensate in dollars and cents because they have to be in a work release program, they are, however, compensated with good time served. And that during that time, they can work off up to 12 months or a year of their sentence. And with a lot of those who I'm hearing work through this system, that means a lot to them to be able to take that time off their sentence. The other thing that I would say, so I was happy to learn of that. The other thing is I would hope that if this is approved tonight, we do all we can to stay in touch with Waycross to see what it is when they do become available so we can cut down on those travel costs and bring that number down as low as we possibly can. That makes sense for us. So I just want to thank you for the work that you slowed down and was able to do. And thank you to the crew for cutting over the weekend and giving us the time to make a decision. The only other question that I did have was, did Waycross give any indication when their crews become available again? I think they did some work for Signature Squares.
I don't think we've had Waycross. come in.
Not Waycross.
It's always been
They
Bacon.
redid some old wrought iron fence when we first started the project over in Waycross.
Okay.
I think that may have even been before Signature Square.
Okay.
And
so
it's still standing too, by the way.
So
They did a good job.
I just want to make sure that we, again, if it goes through, that we do the work to stay in touch with them just if they become.
Sure,
open.
yeah, I'll find out if they would have a cruise available at the start of the next fiscal year or exactly how that works. I'll learn about that.
And the only other question I had is, when you all opened up the 2 positions for skilled labor, how long did it take you to fill those positions, just kind of in general? I know we got 6 open, but did it take you an inordinate long?
We haven't, we just opened them at the beginning of this budget year.
Gotcha. So
We
you
just
haven't had-
included them in the budget, but we have not gotten applications for those projects or positions yet.
Perfect. Thank you for your work on that. I'll open it up with any questions.
Well, I have a quick question about the Waycross DOC. Do they have any skilled masons? I mean, like, do they, we used to get skilled masonry work from Bacon County, but a lot of it had to do with the foreman, the officer that was with them.
Right.
And that changed over the years, and we lost that skilled labor and that in-kind service. Does Waycross have that or not?
I don't know. I didn't actually speak with anybody at Waycross. I called our contact from Alma, Miss Watson,
Okay.
that we spoke with, and I just asked for her counterpart at Waycross. And in that conversation, she and their attorney wrote back and just said that there are no crews available out of the Waycross prison. So I haven't even bothered to contact Waycross
Okay.
yet.
Thank you.
They had a welding shop over there. I actually made the trip over there to help get the fence over there. And they were pretty well formalized and capable of doing what we needed to do with that fencing. So that's been a long time ago.
Yeah, we'll learn more about them, before the renewal or at the time to find a new crew and see what the details are coming out of there.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
I'll make a motion to approve your contract for the cemetery labor service from the Department of Corrections.
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, Director Albertson.
You know, I'd like to say something about this. It took an awful lot to get the 3 crews that we had here. We did not wave a magic wand and come up with 3 very cost-effective crews. Realizing the last one that we let go, we had some deficiencies there, but these folks could be reallocated when they're done in cemeteries or wherever their deployment is by the Public Works Director. They can do anything and go anywhere. So I want us to be mindful of that. I hope that we have not lost this crew. I really do. I know that other municipalities are standing in line waiting for this kind of opportunity for their taxpayers. So I just hope that we'll continue and try to get what we can. We've got a lot of needs. We need to help our city manager out. We need to help our public works director out, and we need a cleaner, safer city of Brunswick. And this is a very cost-effective way to do it when they're available. And we've got our hand in the pot there to do this work that they can do. So I'm glad that I hope we can salvage this crew. I really hope that.
And we've already had conversations with Bacon, so the contract will be handled and sent over to correction. So it's not necessarily about salvaging. We just wanted to make sure we answered the questions.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so with that, we'll move on to number 5, consider approval of proposed special purpose local option sales tax. City Manager McDuffie.
Good evening. I will present the projects that have been listed for the upcoming SPLOST 7 for the city of Brunswick. As we presented at the public meeting a week ago, the SPLOST list contains 2 tiers of project. Tier 1 includes $29,260,000 of projects. Tier 2 includes $8,140,000 of projects, for a total proposed project listing of $37,400,000. The projects include $8 million for paving and milling of city streets, $1.1 million of sidewalk replacements and upgrades, $11.5 million of storm drainage improvements, $900,000 of city building and property improvements, $3.5 million of trails, which is a total public works infrastructure project of $25 million, which represents approximately 68% of the project listing. Public works equipment is $900,000. The public safety equipment is $1.6 million. Parks and community services include funding for renovations of the Ritz Theater in the amount of $950,000, upgrades to Mary Ross Park of $4.5 million, recreation facility improvements of $2.7 million, improvements to the squares of $500,000, restoration and renovation of our cemeteries of $150,000, other park improvements of $500,000, for a total park improvement of $9.3 million. In addition, we have $550,000 allocated for information technology improvements, and that concludes the $37.4 million of projects that are being proposed for the SPLOST for the city in the upcoming referendum. I will answer any questions.
We will now open it for questions from the commission. I'll start out quickly here. Thank you, City Manager McDuffie, and to staff, everyone who's put in work to, I think, come up with a very smart and focused list that is heavy on the thought that we have to make sure that we get our infrastructure together. And that is shown here in these dollars. I would also like to thank our counterparts in the county. Those conversations were forthright and honest, and to see us not just go on population split as was proposed last time, and to see the city at 22%, which is an absolute stronger position than we were in the last SPOS, to pour additional dollars into our projects, pour additional dollars into the infrastructure that means something to our entire community. It was good to work with them, and I am happy that our counterparts in the county saw the value of investing those dollars in the entirety of our city. So with that, I will pass it on to any commissioners for any comment or question. Hearing none, I want to hold on a second. Mr. Daniels. Okay, just had to say, I just didn't know if, I know we don't, no worries. I appreciate you. I appreciate you.
I'd like to make just one comment, I guess, to Ms. McDuffie and other department heads that have worked really hard on this, that I'm just have heard overwhelming good things from people, our constituents, people in the community, both city and county residents, saying how on point the city's proposal was for their SPOS portion. They understood the difference between tier 1 and tier 2, and how that flow of funding was dependent upon the economy, et cetera. But that money was still allocated appropriately for all those projects, even if we have a slower downturn in the economy. And that they just felt that the city was really looked good in their presentation, because everything was really tight and well-focused and easy to understand. So thank you.
Thank you.
Before we take a vote and then hopefully move on to 5A, also want to bring up just publicly that there are 3 additional accountability measures that you may not see in the numbers, but I want to take the time to talk about them. Number 1, every quarter, Director Mills, who's our finance director, will highlight the dollars that have been brought in from SPOS and how those dollars have been allocated to the projects that you see. That will happen every quarter. Director Mills normally gives us that background, but we're going to slow down to make sure anyone who's present or watching totally understands the incoming dollars and how those are allocated out. The second is we will have a biannual meeting, so 2 meetings a year, where not only will we have a conversation with Director Hunter, Director Albertson, and City Manager McDuffie, but we will also be bringing in those who are directly working on those projects to answer questions, not only from the commission, but also from the community. And the third piece of that would be that we're going to name a direct contact for all SPOS related issues and questions. We know a lot of times SPOS projects can seem slow, can seem held up. You have questions about where they're going. We're going to name an individual from the city for all of those questions to be funneled to, so no one has any questions about who they can reach out to get those answers. So I just wanted to put that forward as we move forward and open it up for any additional comments or questions from the commission. And if not, we'll open for a motion.
I would like to make sure too that we post things appropriately on the city's website.
Yes.
So that people can go to that as a resource of information as well. So
That is perfect. We will make sure that we get to work on that with our IT department as well.
Well, Mayor, I'd like to state that we are in the process of hiring a social media and website coordinator, manager, and that person will be charged with keeping those updates. And the SPOS will be very prominent, and updates will be posted to the website timely.
is that similar to an information officer or a little different than that?
They will encompass some of that. We haven't quite decided how much public information, because basically making those statements and publishing those statements is kind of different, but the person we have does have a journalism background, so they will be able to be utilized possibly in that capacity as well.
Okay, thank you.
Want to say a big thank you to Commissioner Roll. I know she's been pressing for that to make sure that we speak to all generations in our community. So thank you for that. With that, motion, I'll open it for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the allocation for SPOS 2022 as presented by Regina McDuffie.
Hearing a first. Hearing a first and a second. All those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes. We will now move on to item 5A, which is the intergovernmental agreement, and City Attorney Corey.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I believe you've all been handed a draft copy of the proposed intergovernmental agreement by and between Glynn County and the City of Brunswick for the use and distribution of proceeds from the 2022 Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, SPOS. I'm just going to hit some highlights. I think, if I'm not mistaken, everybody has probably somewhat of a overall understanding of what we're putting into this IGA, but just to give a little bit of background, with a SPOS, normally SPOS defaults to population-based breakdowns for percentages if a SPOS is passed. The law does provide that where an IGA can be entered into between a city and a county, that you can utilize the IGA to put forth, provisions as to how the tax is distributed if different than the population, as well as the addition of the tiers that we've talked about and that the city manager went through earlier, tier 1, tier 2, and how those are funded. So just with that background and hitting the kind of the major points of this agreement, it's been pretty well stated that it's an estimated $133 million SPOS. It's going to encompass a 6-year SPOS beginning in April of 2023, and it would terminate in March of 2029. That's, of course, if it's passed on the vote that would take place November 2022. What's important to note, of course, in this agreement is that it sets forth a percentage that's not based on population. It would be 22% going to the city, 78% going to the county. You've heard how the tiers are broken down, and it's important to note that tier 1 must be fully funded. So that would be the initial amount that's included in our tier 1 list before tier 2 can begin to be, again, concurrently funded, and those projects can begin to enter the stages of planning, designing, development. So everything needs to be funded fully in tier 1 before we move on to tier 2. The remaining portions of the IGA kind of set forth and mirror state law. We are required to hold our SPOS funds in separate accounts. We are required to have audit of each annual year that the SPOS is being taken in. There is a new clause in here that provides that at the termination, so we're talking in 2029, upon the termination of the SPOS, there's a 5-year period in which these projects must be substantially completed. That's, I think, goes to probably a little bit of accountability. I don't think that's something we've had in the past, but it is put forth in this IGA. I think that's, part of what the public is looking to have, seeing these projects be completed in a timely manner. It's important to note, of course, if we do see an economic downturn or some sort of recession, that these tier 2 projects we are not obligated to complete them. And that's obviously different than in the past, where if they're on your list, you must follow through to complete them or deem them infeasible, which we've seen that's been done in our county. The remainder of the agreement includes the exhibits, which show the distribution of 78% to the county, which tier 1 would be $103,740,000. For the tier 1 city projects, $29,260,000, which represents 22% of that SPOS collection, the $133 million. And then moving forward to the tier 2 for the city of Brunswick represents $8.14 million. Are there any specific questions as to the IGA? Tried to just hit the highlights and the most important notes.
Are there any projects, and I don't know if this is for you, Brian, so much as it might be for Ms. McDuffie, that are more challenging to bridge between tier 1 and tier 2? You know, like if you've spent down what you received as tier 1, but there's money still coming in to then wait for that additional balance that would come in from tier 2, or?
In most cases, the projects are heavily funded in the tier 1 side, so I don't foresee any issue. And I made sure that, you know, the equipment needs and things that we feel need to be replaced in the first 2 years would be funded in that tier 1 section. So I don't foresee any real issues with that.
Okay.
Thank you. One question I have, Brian, and I apologize, I have not had an opportunity to look at the IGA closely. But as far as if there is overages of funding from the SPOS, how is that covered?
Meaning overages like above and beyond going into tier 2 or even past?
Well, if we collect 175 million versus 170 million, which the estimates are based on.
I'd almost hesitate to answer that in case there's overages in the actual project. So I would suspect, I mean, it would be distributed via the same distribution, 2278, and then it would be utilized within whatever projects have not been completed on that list. If all projects have been completed and there are excess proceeds, the law would dictate, and I believe it goes back to the county for them to either pay down general obligation debt or roll back property taxes, if I'm correct.
But if it states specifically in the IGA that that money stays with the city, then it will stay with the city, correct?
Right. I mean, that's, I guess it would be whether or not all of our projects are complete.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't think that all the streets that need to be paved in the city of Brunswick would be paved just from this list alone.
Yeah.
So I would hesitate to say that street paving would ever be completed, but
Carol, what is a percentage of paving that you can do with this money? Do you remember the numbers right off? The paving that our plan shows?
I don't remember, but you're talking about as far as overall.
Yeah.
Mileage speed of the 107 miles. That's right. This would address a lot of our larger streets, Altamas, Parkwood, that kind of thing. So a lot of the higher profile streets or higher traffic streets are big ones.
Thank you.
and I think are targeted with that tier 1 funding. I mean, the majority of the street paving is tier 1 funded. And I should say that I believe the county is taking this IGA into consideration, I believe, at a special call meeting next week. I think that's correct. But they meet tomorrow night to discuss their list, if I'm not mistaken.
Discuss.
Their list, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Two things I wanted to bring up. We need the IGA because without an IGA, the
Default
city
is
of,
population.
the city of Brunswick would fall back to a straight population number, so we would lose percentage points if we don't do this the right way. The other piece of it, I guess, is I want for the general public to know that as we move forward with the list and the IGA, we are still continuing to hit MPA meetings. We are still continuing to educate everyone on what these projects are, what projects may be in their area. I've been to almost every MPA now. And, you know, we've had nothing but positive feedback across the board. So we're happy about that, but we do want you to know that we're not only hitting those MPAs, but also knocking doors and finding other ways to bring in the general public to have real conversations about this loss list and what it can do for our community. So with that, is there any other questions for City Attorney Corey? Hearing none, we'll open it for a motion. I would make a motion, but I can't make a motion.
And this needs to be voted on tonight.
That's correct, yes.
Well, given the fact that it's received legal counsel in concert with the county.
Yeah, I could say with almost certainty that this form will be the same form presented to the county commission for consideration.
Yeah.
And so our vote would need to precede theirs because they will take this vote and also seek out the vote to have the resolution passed for the imposition or to place the question as to whether or not to impose this loss on the ballot.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve the intergovernmental agreement by and between Glenn County and the city of Brunswick for the use and distribution of proceeds from the 2022 special purpose local option sales tax or SPLOST 2022.
Hearing a first, do I hear a second?
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor show by the general sign of aye. Aye. All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, City Attorney Corey. Next, we have consider approval for debris removal and disposal contract. City Manager McDuffie.
Good evening. The city has done RFPs for debris removal services, and I'm sorry, and also debris removal monitoring services. We sent out an RFP in May, starting in May, and went through June and received proposals in July. For the debris removal and disposal contract, we received 7 proposals from Custom Tree Care out of Topeka, Kansas, TFR Enterprises out of Leander, Texas, KDF Enterprises out of Mobile, Alabama, SDR Enterprises out of Fairmont, Georgia, Crowder Gulf from Mobile, Alabama, DRC Emergency Services from Mater, Louisiana, and Series out of Sarasota, Florida. We had a committee of 5 individuals, including myself, the Assistant City Manager, the Public Works Director, Planning Director, and the Purchasing Agent to evaluate the proposals. We looked at, evaluated on the basis of cost, on the association and knowledge of federal emergency management, on project understanding, and the company's experience. We also looked at the pricing list, and the commitment for the contractor would be for a 5-year period. So it would be through July of 2027. The evaluation, based on the evaluations done, we selected Series as the contractor for the debris removal and disposal. And hold on just a second. That contract includes a number of items of statements of work. and also have covers event types, including small jobs that are localized. It includes small events with the significant event for removal, reduction, hauling of debris, significant events with the removal, reduction, hauling, and separation of debris, catastrophic events with the removal, reduction, hauling, and separation of debris, as in addition to other items. Those are just most of the events that were listed in the RFP. And basically, these contracts do not have a financial obligation on the front end. They, of course, only will be activated in the event that they are needed and necessary. The pricing for the contracts would be for whenever those events occur. So we would not activate these contracts. If you read the agenda item, basically it outlined or stated the fact that there were no contracts in place during the weather events in 2016 or 2017. And I presume that the city went forth to get contracts once the events happened. So this will put us in a better space of getting reimbursements from FEMA, and also in a better space of response when an event happened, that we can mobilize this contractor, in a very timely manner. We are requesting approval of series, and Director Albertson is here also to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, City Manager McDuffie. Open it up for questions.
I just want to comment that I'm really glad we're proactive. I mean, when I was reading through this, I just did not realize that we had really left ourselves that exposed during Irma and Matthew, because we didn't have anything in place, and we ended up with a knee-jerk reaction of trying to hurry up and get somebody in place. So I really appreciate the foresight and the forward thinking on making sure that the city's covered in the event that something were to happen, and we're not, hemorrhaging, trying to hurry up and find somebody to do something and having to pay more for the service.
Yeah, if you recall from Matthew, we were very lucky in the sense that actually FEMA came down and did a class, days after Matthew, and they essentially allowed us to piggyback on the debris monitoring and removal contracts that the county had in place. One was with Ceres, and then I think the other one was with Widow Bryan's or some other contractor.
Mm-hmm.
The next year, we just were able to get contracts in place maybe a month or two before hurricane season started. And I think they were approved. I think we even had to pass an emergency ordinance to have these powers be approved when Irma was, on its way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in 2000, I think after Irma, we put in place 3-year contracts, and now we've done new RFPs and are seeking to have a longer term. And hopefully over the 5-year term of these contracts, they'll never be activated, but we know that there's a good possibility we might see some, weather event. So.
And will the pricing, this is a rather exhausting list of pricing. Is the pricing subject to change over the 5-year period?
Well, that was a question that I asked. And we did state to the contractors that, they needed to give us pricing based on the period that we were having bids on. Of course, if prices escalate astronomically, there may be an chance that they'll come back and ask for reconsideration of cost.
And my other question that dovetails in this, the monitoring service, do they look at this contract? Do they look at this pricing to come up with a decision as to whether or not it looks like they're in line? I mean, do they look at the pricing in the contract at all as usual?
Is to compare to removals pricing? Is that what you're asking?
No, the monitoring, the contract that we have for monitoring. Series. The GMC people that are monitoring, do they look at the pricing schedule and deem it usual and customary?
That is not part of their, I don't think.
Okay.
I don't
Scope.
think so. They're only concerned about quantity of debris or number of
Right.
trees that are cut and that kind of thing. Unit pricing of the contract is left between the city and the
Okay,
debris contractor.
okay, thank you.
They're more like on the compliance side.
Gary, you want to talk a little bit about what we were talking about with the Perry School site and with the old Public Works yard being covered up and
One
not
of the-
available, what we're going to do?
Right. One of the things to consider if we have an event is where all this debris is going to go that we collect. During Matthew, we had the old Public Works yard down here, and as with Irma as well, we had the Public Works yard and the Perry School site. Both of those are unavailable right
And
now.
they were covered up too.
Yes, there were. There was a lot of debris. So we need to make sure that we have a site ready. One option we've thought of is the in-street school site, the old between
Reynolds
Reynolds
School.
N and O, that area over there where that old school was. And then we just.
Let me just say something. If you do that, that probably would require fencing, wouldn't it?
Most likely you would want
Yeah.
it fenced. And so, yeah, that needs to be something that's thought through. As we were talking earlier, thought about maybe some Ports Authority property down here, the old gypsum plant. They use that kind of as a staging area for the Golden Ray salvage. And so if all of that's moved out of there now, maybe that's a vacant property that could be used down there. We need to make contact with the Ports Authority and get an agreement in place, I guess, for that. But we take suggestions if y'all have any other ideas of areas, because depending on the severity of the event, it could take a lot of space for all the debris that we may be dealing with.
I talked to Panova, talked to George Cellulose, Brunswick Pulp and Paper Company, everybody knows. I would definitely have some confabulation with them. And Panova would be great, Brunswick wood preserving out there. It looks like they covered up from the road, but I don't know what they got back up in there as far as acreage.
I haven't been back in there in a couple of years either, so I'm not sure.
Any additional questions? If not, we will entertain a motion for consider approval of debris removal and disposal contract.
I'll make a motion to approve these two contracts for disposal and monitoring of debris.
Second.
Well,
Can we do them together? You got to do
I'll
something.
make a motion to approve the removal and disposable contract for debris.
Thank you.
Second.
Hearing a first and a second, all those in favor, show by a sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes.
I'll make a motion to approve the debris removal monitoring service
I
contract.
have some questions before can we
Of course.
Well,
slow down
can I
just a minute?
present the information for
Yeah.
the monitoring?
Please.
Okay, the debris monitoring services, we did go through the RF process the same as we did for the monitoring and for the removal and disposal contract. We received 4 different proposals for the debris monitoring services received from Thompson Consulting Services of Matlin, Florida, Witt O'Brien's from Houston, Texas, GMC from Brunswick, Georgia, and Tetra Tech from Matlin, Florida. Of course, as Garo said, these are monitoring and recording services for the measurements of trucks and loads that are taken of the debris. They monitor drop-offs. They monitor the how many load tickets the site information, they provide delineation of FEMA designations, and keep up with all of the activity that's within the removal of debris. And they facilitate communications between GMA and FEMA, and also provide advice, technical advice to the city in regards to the debris management services. We are recommending GMC as the monitoring company for these services. As stated, their proposal of pricing, we aren't, having to make any upfront investment. This is only in the event of an event that happens within the city that needs these services to be monitored. So with that, I'll offer questions. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One is really pertains to both of these contracts. How many other contracts do these companies have with other cities or counties? In other words, who's not to say they're contracted with 10 other municipalities and counties total? Well, when a hurricane or weather event hits, it may not involve all 10 of those locations, but it could involve 3 or 4 as it comes through. So how do we know we're gonna?
Most of them do, like you say, contract with several, especially the debris contractors.
Right.
And they'll bring in subcontractors from all over the state. They've got relationships with all kind of different subs, tree care companies, heavy equipment companies, and those kind of things. So they'll bring in more subcontractors. In fact, probably when they're here, you would see more subcontractors than you would actually see series vehicles, They will have some of their personnel, but they'll have a lot of subs, especially like you say, if it hits several areas that they're involved in. I think the monitoring companies, they tend to use more of their people, so they probably don't stretch themselves as thin, if that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
They may not go after as many contracts, so they're not as likely to be trying to work in as many areas in one storm event.
Yeah. And for the benefit of the full commission, because I think John and I might be the only ones here, that when we did go through Irma and Matthew, and it might have been more so with Matthew, with all the trees and everything that came down, where we actually did have some issues with our contractor at the time, and the monitoring company did point out some overcharging because of some things that were going on with moving debris from one site to another. Or can you explain how, if you recall, how that all went?
I was not closely involved in that process. I do kind of remember hearing about it from the edges. Yes, there were some problems with that contractor, maybe moving debris from picking it up, moving it to a temporary staging site, or maybe say combining it in a neighborhood, and then moving it to the staging site, say at Perry Park, and then trying to charge for 2 trips and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the monitoring company, which I believe was Whit O'Brien at the time, was very, very sharp, and they were on top of that and made that right and stayed on top of that. But
Yeah.
that's
So,
a big job to try to
it
monitor
is.
that. And so they're valuable, so that it's not our personnel out there trying to watch every load that comes through and everything. So
Yeah. So it does happen, and there is a reason that you have those eyes and ears as the monitor to all that's going on, because there is a lot that's going on. And is there, I know we've got a 5-year contract with the disposal, the removal and disposal. What's the term of the contract for monitoring, or is it just?
It's the same. It's
One.
through 2027.
It is, okay. And is there ever any recommendation to rotate or change? Like, I mean, obviously, we won't change on either one of these for 5 years, but is it advantageous not to always use the same contractors or not?
I don't think it
Okay.
makes a difference. Just, whoever, I guess, presents the best proposal at the time.
Okay, thank you.
I would say one thing that we might ought to be mindful of, and that's to be sure that they remain on the approved list for reimbursement. Just as a safeguard, it wouldn't hurt a thing. That's a good question, Julie. It really is. But I hadn't thought about that, but you got to be on the list if you're going to be reimbursed. And
We did have some trouble with the contractor in Irma, like you said. And so, I think in a situation like that, you'd probably want to be mindful maybe to not go back with a particular contractor. But,
right.
As long as you're getting good performance and they're maintaining their compliance, like you say, and their certifications, I don't know if there's any reason to try to make changes just for the sake of change.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the debris removal monitoring services contract for a 5-year period.
Second.
Hearing the first and the second, all those in favor show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, Director Albertson and City Manager McDuffie for that. I do think are moving into executive session.
Yes, we
Okay.
need to go into executive session for litigation and personnel.
Okay, so we will go into a recess until the end of executive session. Thank you all. Oh, motion to recess.
No, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
No,
What's the purpose? I'm sorry. Okay, I make a motion that we adjourn to executive session for litigation and personnel.
Hearing the first and the second, those in favor show by the sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. We are in executive session. Return from executive session, no action. We've returned from executive session. No action was taken. I will now open it for a motion to adjourn. Hearing the first, do I have a second? Hearing the first and second, all those in favor show by your sign of aye. Aye. All those opposed, same. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned.